How you guys doing today? It's Anthony Gangi. Welcome to another episode of Tier Talk. Guys, Derek Chauvin was stabbed while in federal custody, and I'm getting a lot of emails that are asking how can someone be stabbed while in protective custody. I think if Derek Chauvin was in protective custody, I think the perspective of protective custody has a lot of unknowns for people in the public. So what I want to do in this video explain how the protective custody works, how the system works, especially at a prison level. Again, it's not something that may be consistent to all agencies, but I do have a good perspective from the highest level of practices that I'm willing to share with you. And this way, it can help hopefully alleviate some of the ambiguities. As of now, there's very little information out on the stabbing. All we know is that Derek Chauvin has been stabbed. So maybe doing this video can also help us ask the right questions. But before we do the video, let me just give you my sponsors. American Military University. If you guys looking for a degree, looking to seek higher education, please check out American Military University. They're very supportive of what we do in corrections, also very supportive of what we do here on Tier Talk. We also have Inmate Manipulation Decoded. Great book. If you need some training on inmate manipulation, please check it out. The link to this is in the description. And we also have from Blue 360 Media, my other book, How to Succeed in Corrections, Lessons Learned While Working in a Prison. This book has tons of advice in here. If you guys get a chance, you got to get this book. It's available through the link in the description, but it's only available at this time through Blue 360 Media. And I have another book coming out with them shortly that's going to complement this book with about 41 or 42 more tips that will help you in this profession as well become successful. And again, that's going to be through Blue 360 Media. So guys, protective custody is a very complex process. Some would actually call it a program because technically you don't really want to leave an inmate in protective custody at the highest level of restriction throughout their whole entire stay, especially at the prison setting where they could be sentenced for longer term. In Chauvin's case, over 20 years. A lot of people may see protective custody as isolation, where there's no interaction with other inmates. And that's not always the case either. Protective custody could have a generalized population setting within that PC program that allows for interaction, because we all know at this point that people need to interact with other people. But again, it's a very filtered and controlled process, or it should be a very filtered and controlled process. It should not be a simple process that when someone says, hey, I want PC, that they're automatically allowed into PC. No, there's integrity that you got to protect. Not only do you got to protect the individual who is requesting PC or who may be in need of PC, but you have to, protect the other people who are already in there, that location. So it's not a simple process. It really is a process that requires a high level of due diligence. Now, with that said, how the process should start is there has to be the probability of a threat of violence or harm that could be brought to that individual. It could be specific. So basically you can have someone claiming that they are going to be assaulted. This is the person that's going to assault them. And then there's an investigation that's done and you have reason to believe through the investigation that this assault could be carried out. Or it could be circumstantial. Informants. There may not be a specific threat on a specific informant, but there could be reason to believe that there could be, because they informed. They gave out information, and while the investigations happen, we got to figure out who was affected by that information that was provided. You also have people that could drop out of gangs that could be retaliated against. You have people that are in for not so favorable crimes like sex offenses against children that, could also be a target for assaults or even to be killed. You could have high profile inmates in which other inmates look to connect to their fame. However, they want to share that light. So if you have a high profile inmate like Derek Chauvin who caused some civil unrest, there may be people that want to connect with that fame and either, hurt him or take him out. And in their case, they could be, in their mind, they could be seen as a hero. So again, if we feel that there's a probability for a threat to be carried out, the liability now falls on the facility to protect that inmate. And it doesn't matter what they've done. Our job is to protect that inmate so they can carry out their sentence. Now, granted, the request for PC can come from almost anywhere. To be honest with you, it can come from custody, it can come from civilians, it can come from the lawyers, it can come from the judge, which may not always happen, but it could. Granted, when someone gets sentenced, they usually, forward that person over to the care and custody of the highest level of the person who oversees the agency. And therefore, the agency, who should have all the information they need, will be able to carry out an effective, safe, as best as can be, safe place for that person to do their time. So in Derek Chauvin's case, if they felt that the federal facility in Arizona was the best place for that person to be at, they probably had their reasons. It could be a facility that's actually could be a PC facility, because again, maybe that's where they house PCs most effectively, or it could be a facility that's the least problematic, where they felt he would be the safest, which I wouldn't agree if that was the case. But that could be the case. They felt that this facility is the least problematic out of the federal system, so let's keep him there. And it also kind of blends with his status, basically the amount of time that he has to do. So they put him in a medium security facility, and this facility could have been the facility that's they see as the least problematic. But granted, how the PC process works once it starts to move forward is the sign-offs usually come from somebody that's at the highest level of operations, whether that's within the facility or just above the facility's oversight. And basically what they do is they have an investigation that goes out, and the investigation should determine the need for protective custody. That means this investigation should be specific. It should note whatever evidence that would make you want to lean towards protective custody or not towards protective custody, because you have people that do play the system that will say they need it, but there's no specifics. There's no actual threat against them at that time. And therefore, now it's like, well, I may not want to put that person in because that person could be manipulating the system in order to get into PC. So that's why it's very dependent on the investigative authority to really give out the information that's needed so placements are proper. In this case here, this is pretty much cut and dry. You have a high-profile case that caused some civil unrest, and therefore this person needs to be placed in PC at least until it pans out, which may never happen. And we'll get to long-term placement as we move forward, because in a prison, you are dealing with more long-term placement, where in a jail, it may be just a little bit temporary, because once the case is heard, if the person is found guilty, they're going to go and do their sentence with the prison setting anyway. So some of the things that you may do at the jail may be a little bit different at the prison setting, because the prison setting is more long-term. I know some people may look at the jail and say, well, this person's PC, he could be isolated. Yeah, maybe at the jail for the duration of his case, depending on how long that case may take. But once they get to the prison and they have to carry out whatever, in this case here, over 20 years, you're not going to isolate that person for 20 years. It is a PC program. You're going to have to try to introduce that person to other inmates. But again, it's been filtered. And I wish I could say that PC, once someone's in PC, the issues are non-existent, but that's not the case. They just get minimized. Again, I wish I could say things are 100% within our control, but sometimes they're not. And sometimes all we can do is react. But having said that, we should have a nice filter in place that allows for any of the concerns that are very evident, very surface, to be handled. So if something does happen, which we don't want to happen, but if something does happen, it wasn't a simple oversight, or it wasn't hopefully negligence, because that's the key. So the first thing you want to do when it comes to protective custody is, if the request goes from the inmate, you want to have an investigation. You're going to put that inmate into some level of pre-hearing. Basically, this is probably the highest restrictive status within the PC program, which is going to be the pre-hearing for PC placement. That is going to be the highest level of control you're going to have over that inmate. And there's going to be a certain amount of time in which you have to have your evidence in place of whether you're going to place that person in PC or whether you're not going to place that person in PC. If the person is involuntary, then the time is going to be a little bit quicker because that person doesn't want to be there. You're going to get a lot of phone calls coming in. And basically at this point here, they're going to be concerned about the rights of that individual. If the person is voluntary, you may have a couple added days to that because that's the person wants to be there. There's not going to be people fighting from the outside. So having said that, the first step right now is the investigative process. So the person has been placed in an investigative PC process where they are now going to be, it's going to be determined by the investigative authority, what evidence can be utilized to either help someone or a committee or the highest level of authority within that prison or the agency approve the PC or disapprove it. And then again, that will be seen later on when they do the review. The next step is to go ahead and meet with the inmate, talk to them to see if they really do want PC, what are their reasons, and then basically with the support of the investigation, make the determination of if PC is needed or not. In this case with Derek Chauvin, 100% it's needed. Actually, to be honest with you, because it's such a high profile case, they may not even have officially, done the hearing. They could have just placed that person in voluntarily because it looked like he wanted it. There was enough information there to note that there could be a threat on him. So he may even skip that whole process and get placed into PC, which to me would make sense. It's obvious that this individual would need it. Now, granted, on the prison side of it all, and I don't know, it depends on how long the trial could be on the jail side, but on the prison side of it all, this is long term. So granted, if the guy's got to do 20 years or over 20 years, am I looking to keep him in PC in isolation for 20 years? And no, we're not planning on doing that. So there's, outside of involuntary and voluntary, there's also another avenue where when we feel it's safe, or it's safer, let's just say when we feel it's safer, you're going to look to see if you can have congregate or non-congregate. Congregate would be a chance to introduce the PC inmate to other inmates in PC. And again, this has been strongly filtered. It's very limited. Not everyone will have access to that individual, but just an effort to hopefully manage this person's mental health, because we got to have interaction. Or if the person chooses not to be in congregate, because again, the probability of them being assaulted is so high that you just cannot trust anyone next to that individual. And again, that's going to be something that after the initial placement, the PC inmates, they do get seen, or they should be seen either quarterly, maybe every 6 months or yearly, just to kind of review their process, review the progress, and basically where they're at, and basically, does the need for PC need to continue? Do we still need to keep you in protective custody? Because some things could be situational and they die out, and then you got somebody in PC for 10, 15 years and all their threats have long left the facility. Or you could have stuff that's very long-term. In a case like Derek Chauvin, the biggest concern you're going to have with PC here, and why they may have to remain in PC, is because it's such a high-profile case. There are eyes on him and that facility all the time. So granted, you could have an appeal that goes through that, when the case starts to die out, someone puts an appeal and the media grabs onto that attention. Or you could have an anniversary in which the media is like, hey, it's been 10 years since George Floyd's death, and all of a sudden it goes back into the mainstream again. So there's a lot of uncontrollables within that may say, hey, a management side, since we are liable for this person's safety, because it's such a high profile crime, and at any point someone could do another story on it, or he's constantly still going through appeals, I think we need to keep this person in PC. I don't think this is something that's ever going to die out. because there's just so much eyes on this individual. Now, granted, when that becomes the case, and you know the person's going to remain in PC, you may want to introduce that person to the generalized population within that PC, which now, again, talks about the congregate interaction. And that's when you talk to the individual and ask them, hey, do you feel like you'll be ready to interact with other inmates within the PC setting? Now, mind you, when you have this committee, when you do revisit the PC needs, whether it's quarterly, every 6 months, or yearly, you're visiting it with classification, you're visiting it with someone from administration, someone from a higher level oversight of the agency. Mental health is also going to be there, because if the person chooses that, hey, I don't want to congregate, I want to stay by myself, mental health is going to help us make a determination of whether this is possible. Is this person still good with his mental health, or are they decompensating? And then again, the decisions are going to have to be made to make sure that, one, we manage the person's safety, but also we balance that with their mental health concerns, because we do have that need to interact. So how are we, if he decides not to, or she decides not to be part of congregate interaction, how are we providing them with interactions in the meantime? How are family phone calls going? How are visits? Is he getting visits? I mean, there's a way to always complement the gap, so basically, if they don't want to be around other inmates and it makes sense because maybe the threat is still visible, how do we make up for that interaction? Well, we could do it through family. He's getting visits, he's getting phone calls, he's able to write. Plus, we have mental health professionals, social workers, there's people that still visit the unit that are able to communicate with them on a daily basis, and that helps his day or her day progress forward. But with that said, the emails that I was getting was related to how could this happen? How could Chauvin be stabbed when he should be by himself? Well, that's not always the case. And that's what I want to make clear here. And that's what I kind of just said. They could be trying to make an effort to moving forward in the program by introducing them to some congregate interaction with other inmates who have been filtered, who have been, put in PC because there is a legit threat, but they also don't pose a threat to others, or at least specifically to Derek Chauvin. So this could be something that was incidental. This could have been something that maybe it's not related to the case at all. Maybe he just pissed somebody off, and unfortunately, this is the end result. And by the way, PCs, they still could be problematic inmates. I mean, trust me, when you know you have to protect yourself at all times, they could be very crafty and innovative in creating weapons. So I don't want people to think that PC is an inmate that's always by themselves in isolation, especially at the prison. That may not be the case. The program should try to introduce them to some level of safe congregate interaction with other inmates, because again, it could be needed for their mental health. And again, if it can't be provided, there's other means of them getting interaction. But again, you got someone that's going to be there for over 20 years. Over 20 years. So you're not going to keep that person, or you don't want to keep that person by themselves without any type of interaction for the course of 20 years. So there will be some effort to introduce them to other inmates. But I hope this explains it. Again, there's very little information as to what happened here. I just wanted to let people know that all because someone got stabbed in PC doesn't mean it's automatically going to be negligence. Doesn't mean that the inmate was not supposed to be around anyone. Once we know a little more, I will provide some more clarification. But I just wanted to answer the emails that were coming my way, and hopefully this provides a little bit of information of the PC process. It's a very protected process, but it's also, some people will consider it a program because they're not forgotten. You still have to tend to their needs. They still have to get what they're supposed to get, yard, rec, all these other things. And in order to maintain someone's mental health, there always will be an effort to introduce them to other inmates, unless the probability is extremely high that they cannot be around anyone. And that's rare. That's rare, but it does happen. But again, you have to figure out, well, how do we make up for this lack of interaction? As always, guys, the show is Tear Talk. If you haven't, please subscribe, interact, engage, comment, hit that bell. Bell's going to notify every time I post a video. Stay safe.